No matter how much we give them the pronouns. They want more and more and more. We used to just say this as a joke, to say, look, you better watch it, left. You're going to get so far left, you're going to be like some sort of Islamic extremist. Now, the distinction is gone. They are as one. They are the enemy, and they're a huge threat to Western sovereignty. Fuck you, Islam, and by Islam I mean all of Antifa and most gullible liberals.
I don't think actually a theocratic Iran can be contained even without nuclear weapons. I think there's a confrontation in our future between our civilization, I'll say that without embarrassment, the world that at least respects, if it doesn't always practice, the rule of law, and that has devised certain forms of diplomacy and certain systems of arms control to which the Iranians are legally signatories, and a regime that has the clearly expressed ambition to break out of and to trample all those conventions.
You guys have rights. You have freedom. I'm talking to you women. I'm talking to you feminists. And you are using that freedom to push us aside and choose a patriarchy that is more oppressive, that takes away more of your rights. Well, I think we're going to have to bring the patriarchy back and protect women from themselves.
And the social attitudes in the Muslim community that are at odds with values that really must be non-negotiable, like free speech and women's rights and gay rights. And in particular, we're worried about protecting them from many of the illiberal people who have been pouring into Europe. In this one, we more or less fully agree on what we're against. And what we're against is Western civilization committing suicide.
But the truth is, there is a problem with Islamophobia in this country, and it's Islamophobia.
You'll be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion.
I've covered Western chauvinism and atheism and the alt-right a lot in the past. I made 2 videos on it, and they go pretty in depth. And we're going to be using some of the research from those videos while talking about the atheism angle of this. But today, I want to talk about something I've been thinking about for a long time, and that's the rise of Western chauvinism. And you may ask yourself, rise of Western chauvinism, hasn't this always been a thing? Well, I'm mainly talking about Western chauvinism that has a massive focus on Islam, which comes out of the 1990s and, of course, 9/11. And what we're going to talk about is the through line from New Atheism to groups like the Proud Boys. The Proud Boys, of course, are happily to describe themselves as Western chauvinists. And because they have a lot of extreme elements to them in their views on the world, you might kind of discount the link between, I guess, more mild-mannered people like Sam Harris as opposed to some, crazier people like Gavin McInnes. But once we get into this and I show you the rhetoric both use, you will be able to see the link between these two on Islam specifically. But of course, a point I want to make is that the Proud Boys are seen as a terrorist group in places like Canada. Even in the US, are seen as an extremist group. Even though they pretend they're not racist, it's pretty clear they hold extreme racist beliefs on a number of issues. But yes, we are going to focus on the Western chauvinism, focusing on Islam in regard to these Proud Boys, and more focusing on Gavin McInnes, the founder of them, rather than their, current iteration without him leading them. Now, because one person commented on this and now I'm super paranoid, I'm going to plug my social medias and Patreon for like a minute. So double tap your screen if you want to skip that bit. Now, before we go any further, recently YouTube demonetized my entire channel, supposedly for bullying. What had actually happened is I'd been mass flagged by some community or some fans. Thankfully, after bigger creators like the Humanist Report, the Serfs, Carl Kalinsky, and Wowshi retweeted the tweet, YouTube went back on its policies, but it's shown me how fragile this is as a source of income. So if you want to support my work continuing for the future, regardless of what YouTube do, please consider becoming a patron. If you want to join our growing community, please check out the Discord and the subreddit in the description. And if you want to follow me personally, check out @the_Kavernacle on Instagram and Twitter. And also u/TommyCahill1995 for my personal Reddit. Also, we're getting so close to 30k. I'm so excited to finally add a new chocolate orange for every 5k. we put a new one on this little stack. Also, people have asked for this, so we have a second channel, the Kavernacle Extra. Post my live stream archives on there, and hopefully we'll start posting the podcast on there as well. So go subscribe to that if you're interested. The link is in the description. Now, I have some strong words for new atheist types, and like I've made multiple videos on before, I am an atheist myself, but the problem I have with new atheism is their lack of, I guess, political analysis that goes along with the theoretical stuff. I feel like a lot of new atheists live in a theoretical world, and they don't analyze things through class or through politics and stuff, but we're going to get into all that. But basically, what has happened with the new atheists, and they had their moment in the sun, but they're still around, is that because of 9/11, their status got elevated. But it also goes back to a guy called Samuel Huntington, who wrote something called The Clash of Civilizations, I think it was in 1993, and then published in a book in 1996. And basically, what he was talking about is that after the Cold War, and as the West pushes on with like globalization and all this stuff, the new sort of Cold War that will emerge is between cultures. Specifically, this new Cold War will emerge between the West and Islam. Now, it caused a bit of a stir in its time, but what happened after 9/11 is people looked back at this work and said, my God, Samuel Huntington was right all along. Here comes the clash with Islam. Now, it's not surprising, along with the supposed clash between the Islamic world and the Western world, people like Richard Dawkins, like Sam Harris, like Christopher Hitchens, got their status even more elevated while they criticized the so-called Islamic world. And I feel like a lot of their discourse has led to groups like the Proud Boys and their Western Chauvinism being sort of accepted, and Western Chauvinism in general was accepted for a long time, specifically towards Islam, because of things like 9/11, Huntington, and new atheism, essentially intellectualizing forms of bigotry. So first, we're going to have a look at a Sam Harris passage from The End of Faith. So, we are at war with Islam. It may not serve our immediate foreign policy objectives for our political leaders to openly acknowledge this fact, but it's unambiguously so. It is not merely that we are at war with an otherwise peaceful religion that has been hijacked by extremists. We are at war with precisely the vision of life that is prescribed to all Muslims in the Quran, and further elaborated in the literature of the Hadith, which recounts the sayings and the actions of the Prophet. A future in which Islam and the West do not stand on the brink of mutual annihilation is a future where most Muslims have learned to ignore most of their canon. Such a transformation is by no means guaranteed to occur, however, given the tenets of Islam. So that was back in the early 2000s during, the height of the war on terror, and basically Sam Harris saying we're at war with Islam because most Muslims follow this vision of this religion, which is inherently violent, and but it's not going to rest until it conquers parts of the world or imposes their ideology through violent means. It's quite inflammatory, and you can imagine why people were so outraged about it. There's also another argument that became pretty infamous where he talks about what would you do if an Islamist state got the nuclear bomb. What would we ever do if an Islamist regime which grows dewy-eyed at the mere mention of paradise ever acquires long-range nuclear weaponry? If history is any guide, we will not be sure about where the offending warheads are or what their state of readiness is, and so we will be unable to rely on targeted conventional weapons to destroy them. In such a situation, the only thing likely to ensure our survival may be a nuclear first strike of our own. In my mind, he's hinting towards Iran, and we're going to get into Iran now, so let's have a look at what Hitchens had to say about Iran.
Well, since we're on that topic, do you think a nuclear Iran can be contained?
No. I don't think actually a theocratic Iran can be contained even without nuclear weapons. I think there's a confrontation in our future between civilization, I'll say that without embarrassment, a world that at least respects, if it doesn't always practice, the rule of law, and that has devised certain forms of diplomacy and certain systems of arms control to which the Iranians are legally signatories, and a regime that has the clearly expressed ambition to break out of and to trample all those conventions. I think they've asked for a fight and should know that on those conditions they certainly will get one.
So both these guys essentially think that if a country like Iran got the bomb, it'd just start using it because the people in Iran and the leadership of Iran, the Ayatollah and the mullahs and stuff, because they are devout Muslims, that is just the end goal of our ideology. But again, like I said, these guys lack political analysis, class analysis. Do you honestly think a country like Iran, if it got a nuclear weapon, would just start firing it for no reason? A lot of people in Iran are nationalists as well. A lot of people in Iran just want to live their life. And a lot of people in Iran, including the Ayatollah and the mullahs, don't just want to commit suicide. Otherwise, they would have been going out doing suicide bombings. When's the last time the Iranian military or anyone in the Iranian leadership started doing suicide bombings or something like that? It just doesn't happen. Like a state, you know, we taught in international relations, there's the realist school of thought where all these countries exist in a form of like hostility, and the only reason they don't do things is because of like mutually assured destruction, or sometimes it's better to work together to preserve yourself. And this school of thought thinks there's no morals and stuff, and I tend to subscribe to it. So I believe if Iran got the bomb, the only way it's going to use the bomb is just impose itself more on the world stage, have some more parity with the Israelis, who, this is quite telling, they recently just bombed a nuclear facility in Iran, I think it was yesterday, and they have secret nuclear weapons by all accounts. Also, I think it's telling that Christopher Hitchens described us as a civilized world. Iran aren't civilized. And I always find that ironic. The new atheist types are always talking about Western civilization, us being civilized. Not that the US is one of the most destructive world powers that's ever existed, doing some of the most heinous shit you could ever imagine. Even if it was just relegated to what they did in Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia, but it's not just relegated to that. All these awful programs the CIA ran, every awful dictator they enable, including people like Saddam Hussein, including people like the Saudi royal family. Again, there is no moral high ground to take against a country like Iran just because our internal systems maybe aren't as brutal as theirs. Our external foreign policy is way worse than what they do to their own civilians. But maybe you could say that was the height of the war on terror. Hitchens has been dead a while now. Sam Harris is still around, but I don't think Sam Harris has really changed. Now here is him giving an intro to his conversation with Douglas Murray, who's also a pretty well-known critic of Islam, who talks about the death of Europe. Surprise, surprise, these guys are actually having a conversation about immigration and demographics and how Europe is slowly dying because of Muslim refugees.
Douglas and I spent a lot of time in this podcast, certainly most of the time, talking about the situation in Europe with respect to immigration and Islam and the social attitudes in the Muslim community that are at odds with values that really must be non-negotiable, like free speech and women's rights and gay rights. And in particular, we're worried about protecting them from many of the illiberal people who have been pouring into Europe. In this one, we more or less fully agree on what we're against. And what we're against is Western civilization committing suicide. And if you think that puts the matter too strongly, you haven't read Douglas's book, and you probably haven't been paying much attention to what's been happening in Europe. And if you think one has to be a fan of Trump in order to worry about this, well, then you haven't been paying attention to this podcast. But on the topic of Trump, Trump just gave a speech in Poland where he said, and I quote, "The fundamental question of our time is whether the West has the will to survive. Do we have the confidence in our values to defend them at any cost? Do we have enough respect for our citizens to protect our borders? Do we have the desire and the courage to preserve our civilization in the face of those who would subvert or destroy it?" End quote. And while I find abundant fault with the messenger, as you know, I can't find fault with that particular message. And the fact that liberals can't seem to see what's at stake here, the fact that they are embarrassed to defend, quote, Western values, as though that were synonymous with racism, or the legacy of colonialism, or xenophobia, or a lack of compassion, that is making liberalism politically defunct at this point. And that increasingly worries me. And happily in the United States, we are in a better situation, demographically and with respect to immigration and just geographically, and that has implications for immigration. But one cannot be cheerful about what's been happening in Europe.
Now, before we continue, I believe this clip was in 2018. I find it extremely hilarious how Harris is talking about there are certain non-negotiable things in Western civilization, like, rights for people, freedom of speech, while he talks about Poland and Trump. Poland, the country that has recently enacted laws against LGBT people and abortion, apparently is part of the West which is also civilized and not backwards and something we should protect. I wonder if he also thinks countries like Hungary are part of the West. I'm not sure about his opinion on that stuff, but these are also countries that don't take in refugees. So you can't even say they're being influenced by like Islamists. They're doing this to appeal to Christian nationalists, which a lot of these countries have a massive base of politically. Just find that very hilarious that he's holding up Poland as some sort of, you know, civilized country, totally better than all the Muslim ones. Now, these guys are clearly Western chauvinists who don't have nuance. But what I also find interesting when I talk about things like class analysis, political analysis, right? In the UK, a lot of Muslim immigrants, I'm not talking about the refugee crisis, Muslim immigrants who come here are from countries like Pakistan and Bangladesh. Now, while these countries have quite strict Islamic laws and everything, the people coming here are very, very poor. And they're looking for a better quality of life coming here, right? These guys don't have access to much capital. These guys don't have much access to politics if they ever vote at all. So even if these guys became the majority of the country, say 55% of the UK became Pakistani or Bangladeshi Muslim, it does not equal political power, right? It doesn't equal laws being enacted that they like, because what these guys are missing is the class analysis. And take that to the refugee crisis. These guys call it a migrant crisis. Refugees coming to this country literally have nothing. And he's talking about, you know, they're in a better position in the US because they're far away from this stuff, so they don't have to deal with it. But these guys have nothing, right? How are they influencing the culture? How are they influencing the laws? When are we going to pass Sharia law in the UK? And even in countries where, if you looked at it demographically, maybe they are more conservative. In Egypt, for example, it's ruled by a military dictatorship. The military dictatorships in Egypt have always been against Islamicism, so much so they obviously ousted the democratically elected Muslim Brotherhood president and historically have always cracked down on the Muslim Brotherhood. Again, just having a large percentage of people who believe in a certain thing does not translate to laws always being enacted that they want. So regardless of their religious views, political views, poor refugees or poor immigrants coming to rich Western countries does not translate to these countries dying or the culture completely changing or the laws completely changing. As a left-wing white person in the UK, we can't even pressure the government to do anything we want, and we have political power and we have capital, not as much as, you know, right-wingers, but we have more power. We can't do anything. What hope does, you know, a group of poor Bangladeshi immigrants or poor refugees from Libya have at changing stuff here in the UK? But let's link this to the Proud Boys, self-described Western chauvinists. If you don't know who the Proud Boys are, I'm going to play a clip of its current leader going on Tim Pool's podcast, which shows you where he politically lies on the spectrum, giving this guy a softball interview. But he describes the ridiculous origins of the Proud Boys set up by Gavin McInnes.
So let me ask you, man. What are the Proud Boys?
It started as a joke on Gavin's show. And
Gavin McInnes.
Gavin McInnes' show.
Founder of Vice. Co-founder.
Co-founder of Vice, which I give him crap for that all the time. But we started as a joke on Gavin's show. It wasn't supposed to go past the first meeting that they had. He was trying to get his intern laid. And he invited everybody to the bar on a Friday night. And they came out. And it wasn't supposed to, like, he made up the name from an Aladdin musical. And he did the tenets and the credo, the degrees of membership, all right there a cappella, like straight. What are your tenets? And these are the 10 tenets of being a Proud Boy. And what are the degrees? And he went through them. And it was made right there on the spot. And it started blowing up.
So Gavin McInnes is the founder. Like I said earlier, he's no longer the leader. But I want to use him as an example of the Proud Boys' developing ideology. Now, he made a video on Rebel Media about the left and Islam, basically saying what New Atheists say, and again, like New Atheists, ignoring the class analysis, the political analysis, saying that because liberals are very scared of calling out Islam and they're scared of being called Islamophobic, they will happily ally themselves with Muslims, and what will happen eventually is Muslims will get into power and turn around and kill the left and kill liberals. And we just can't see that because we're so scared of being called racist.
You know, David Horowitz to talk about what strange bedfellows Islam and the far left is. And it was the very far left that was choosing these strange bedfellows. But now they're all one. It's not a hyperbolic example anymore. They are so similar, they've subsumed. And it's no longer just Antifa, it's liberals. As we discussed earlier, the Women's March was run by Linda Sarsour. She wants Sharia law. And then we had another demonstration right after. And then we have another one yesterday in New York that was run by CARE. What do they call the Council of South American Islamic Relations or something? Funded by the same people who fund Hamas. So the distinction is gone now. And I was noticing the way they treat women. Like at the inauguration day, what they do is, first of all, they make women into men, right? And then they put these women in the front lines. This is all right out of Islam's book. Jeopardize their safety. And then these women get attacked. And then, of course, they use propaganda, taqiyya, to say, oh, you hit a woman. And in Canada, where the entire country has been brainwashed by the left, they are the brainwashed left, they are embracing this. And what they don't understand is this scorpion is riding the back of a frog. The second he crosses the river, you're going to get the stinger in your ass and you're going to die. You'll be the first to go.
This rhetoric was mainstreamed by New Atheism, blaming liberals, blaming the left, blaming all these people for what happens in Europe with, terrorist attacks, not laying the blame at the neoconservative governments who plunge us into war and then make millions of Muslims feel like we actually are waging a war against Islam, which leads to many people becoming radicalized. They don't blame that type of stuff. They don't blame US foreign policy in the Middle East and Central Asia. Don't blame UK policy. It's just the left's fault. It's us. We're way too tolerant, and we're really tolerant of intolerance, and what will eventually happen is we'll get some Islamist dictatorship which will all punish us. Now, I'm not going to say Gavin McInnes is the same as Sam Harris. He definitely isn't. He's way more extreme. So here he is saying that you shouldn't have a Muslim president.
Would you support a Muslim American for president?
Hell no. That would be insane. That would be like having a German president in 1942 in America. But the truth is, there is a problem with Islamophobia in this country, and it's Islamophobia-phobia. We are so petrified of offending people we're at war with that we bend over backwards.
Now, it's not surprising, but aren't these guys like patriots and stuff? Doesn't the Constitution say like no state religion and stuff? But here he's saying you can't have a Muslim as president. And the worst problem is there's not enough Islamophobia. Now, he also made another video about Islam not being dope. And this one made me laugh because he plays some bangers that are about the hijab, like these rap songs by Muslim women about the hijab, and they actually are pretty catchy. But he's going off on one, and he's so mad about it. But I think this clip is telling he also ties it to New Atheism. He talks about Christopher Hitchens in this clip.
She be rocking that hijab.
She be rocking that hijab. She be rocking it.
Hey, stop.
She be rocking it. Hater, why you talking?
Parliament building, Joe.
She a modest girl.
That's who's paying for your video, I'm sure. Look at this. I'm sorry, go back. I screwed it up by getting in the way. That's a Muslim woman on a skateboard. Muslim women don't ride skateboards. This is a myth. You don't see women wearing... First of all, you don't see women riding many skateboards, but wearing a hijab, just play that. By the way, I've listened to the lyrics. The lyrics say nothing. How did they go back in time? Why did Iran go from this to this? I don't know. I wager inbreeding. I wager the Wasabis took over the Quran and they took the worst part of it and made it the Quran teaching. You know, Christopher Hitchens warned us about this. He said that we were going to be hijacked by a disgusting, violent sect of Islam.
You will be told you can't complain because you're Islamophobic. The term is already being introduced into the culture as if it was an accusation of race hatred, for example, or bigotry, whereas it's only the objection to the preachings of a very extreme and absolutist religion. Watch out for these symptoms. They are not just symptoms of surrender, very often ecumenically offered to you by men of God in other robes, Christian and Jewish and smarmy ecumenical. These are the ones who will hold open the gates for the barbarians. The barbarians never take a city till someone holds the gates open for them.
Look, you guys have rights. You have freedom. I'm talking to you women. I'm talking to you feminists. And you are using that freedom to push us aside and choose a patriarchy that is more oppressive, that takes away more of your rights. Well, I think we're going to have to bring the patriarchy back and protect women from themselves. Islam is not dope, it's sexist.
Now, that last bit is pretty telling with Christopher Hitchens, how these guys will use the stuff said by people like Hitchens and Harris to justify their own Islamophobia. Now, what I think of when we talk about Islamophobia isn't, criticizing Islam or people being afraid to criticize Islam. It's racializing Islam. And Western chauvinism does this, where Islam is a monolith and the West is a monolith. So Sam Harris will lump a country like Poland in with the West, even though it's anti-gay and anti-abortion. He'll also lump in a country like Egypt with the Islamic world, like Saudi Arabia. Like those two countries are the same, when I've just said to you that Egypt is ruled by a secular military dictatorship, while it does have some Islamic style laws, it's nothing like Saudi Arabia, and they've constantly cracked down on the Muslim Brotherhood for, decades. But I also find it funny that Western male chauvinists, because that's another fact of the Proud Boys, they're not just Western chauvinists, they're male chauvinists. They believe in these gender roles. They believe women are happier in the home and that's their place. Lots of people like Gavin McInnes himself have said this stuff, and now they're crying about sexism of the hijab. And I'm not saying that, inherently there is sexism at play in the Muslim view of things like the hijab and the niqab. It's sexist view of both women and men, that women, if you don't cover up, then what happens to you is partially on you. Men are basically uncontrollable animals, and if we see, a bit of flesh or we see too much, then we can't control ourselves. Again, I don't agree with either of those things, but at the same time, I'm not coming at a place where I think women should be in the home, and I'm not a male chauvinist saying this stuff. And also, these guys are so big on freedom. Here are women proudly singing about how they like to wear their hijab, which in essence is just like a scarf around your head, which anyone can wear. And that sends them into such a frenzy. Again, my problem isn't people wearing this stuff. It's often the social cohesion and the ideological justification for them. If you want to wear a hijab, then go for it. If you want to sing about how much you like it, then go for it. I got no problem with that. It's just funny how people who make their whole stance about free speech and freedom just get so enraged by people wearing what they want. That is the through line you can see through New Atheism. When you're talking about Western civilization being at risk, or the death of Western civilization, or you leftists are killing Western civilization by allying yourself with Muslims and stuff like this, it just shows you these guys are Western chauvinists. They're Western supremacists. They believe the West is the best. The Western culture is the best. And everything we do is basically beyond reproach. And even if there are some bad stuff, it's nothing compared to Muslim countries. And this is probably for another video, but the revisionist history at play to believe that the West is so superior to Middle Eastern countries or Central Asian countries is just mind-blowing. So I don't like using the term Dark Ages in Europe, but when you take countries like England in 800 AD compared to Iraq in the same time, the country that is extremely backwards and ruined by religion is not like Iraq and Baghdad. It is, England. And it's the Christians in England that are totally backwards. But the version of history these guys have is that the Christians were always more enlightened. A lot of them were following the Roman tradition, started by, the Roman Empire when it converted to Christianity. And it's just like a through line of progression. And then you have the Enlightenment and, the French Revolution and the American Revolution, which invented freedom for everyone, freedom of religion and freedom for citizens. And while Islam was just totally backwards the whole time, and the Muslim world is just stuck in the Dark Ages still today. It's stuck in medieval times, and there's really been no progression, and there's been no worth to them essentially, even though it was Muslim scholars who preserved the work of the ancient Greeks and then let Christians translate them into Latin. But to believe Western chauvinism, you have to believe this revisionist history. But let's also just say, for real, Western chauvinism is not relegated to fringe groups like the Proud Boys. The US government is Western chauvinist, the UK government is Western chauvinist. But I guess being outwardly Western chauvinist and not even trying to hide it, which is what Gavin McInnes and people like that are, and maybe Sam Harris to a lesser extent, I guess that is what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the rise of Western chauvinism. The US and UK government pretend they're not Western chauvinists, and they dress it up with language of, inclusivity and diversity. You'll get Boris Johnson, for example, wishing the Muslim community in Britain a happy Ramadan or a happy Eid. you'll get Joe Biden doing the exact same thing. But these guys are Western chauvinists. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Please like the video. Please subscribe to the channel, so close to 30k. If you want to follow me on social media, at the Kavernacle on Twitter and Instagram. If you want to support my work, please support me on Patreon as well. That is in the description. Come join our communities on Discord and my subreddit. And if you made it this far, thank you for watching.